G'day everyone, True here, and welcome to another African Violet video. Today I'll show you what to do when you bring a new plant home from the store, how to divide it up and repotting it into some new soil. So I have two plants which I recently got from Bunnings. Both are Noids, large standard African Violets. I'm going to start with this one. So the first thing we need to do is to take it out of its pot. So the easiest way to do this is just pop your hands underneath the leaves. And I have a bucket here. So I'm just going to put the old soil in. Just give me 1 sec. I'll move these pots out of the way. This here. So all I'm doing is removing the excess soil. So just putting it in a separate container, gently prying away. So you can see how it's going. Taking away. Now a lot of this, when commercial growers grow African violets, they generally put them in soil that has a lot of peat moss in it, and that's just so that they stay quite moist and wet, the soil, because they're going to be transported for a while and then sitting in stores for a while, and they may not get watered for quite a while. So they'll often use soil that it's probably not the best for African violets to be sitting in long term. So there we go. We've got a fair bit of the soil off. You don't want to disturb the roots too much because African violets don't like their roots to be disturbed too much. So next we have to check to see how many plants you have in the pot. You may only have one. So you're looking for the crowns of the plant to see how many crowns that you've got. And you can see on this plant here, there's quite a few little sucker plants that are in there, but they're just a little bit small and potentially a little bit tricky to divide up just yet. So there's a floppy leaf there. I might just remove that leaf. So you've got another little sucker plant coming there. But I think I'm just going to leave that for the moment. So we're just having a look in there to see if there's definitely more than one crown there, but what I can actually see is that the sucker plants are too small just yet to divide it up very easily without doing a lot of damage. So I'm just going to leave it. I'm going to leave it and not divide this plant up just yet. So just got a pot to transplant it into. Now you want it sitting quite high up out of the soil. You don't want any of that, the base of the leaves sitting in under the soil, because African violets don't like that. And you can push the soil in, but don't compact it too much because they also don't like that. Now I'm using just a straight African violet soil mix. And there's a little bit of perlite in this mix, but not much. And the reason why I'm doing that is that where I live, my climate is extremely hot and dry. And we don't get a lot of humidity. So because of that, I'm struggling to keep water up to my African violets. So what I'm doing at the moment is that I'm just planting them directly into straight African violet mixed soil. And the reason for that is because it will retain the moisture a lot more. when you add perlite or vermiculite into the soil, it increases drainage and aeration, but drainage, and that means that the water can't hold into the pot long enough. And if you pot your African violets into terracotta pots, they dry out really, really fast. And if you're living in a really hot, dry climate with very little humidity, and you put your African violets into terracotta pots, you will struggle if you plant them with lots of perlite or vermiculite and African violet soil mixture. You'll struggle to keep the water up to them. If you've got the time and you want to devote that time to them, then you'll have no problem. You'll have time to water them every day or every other day. But it can be a little bit difficult. So at the moment, just because of my climate, I'm going to pot directly into straight African violet soil. But this could be different for your climate. African violets are very climate specific, so whatever works for your climate is going to potentially be different to what works for me here. So just be aware that because I'm using this soil mix doesn't mean this is going to be the right soil mix for you. So this is the second Noid that I've got, and Noid just means no identification. It means that this is an African violet that doesn't have a specific variety name. So we're going to remove it out of the pot. So I'm just going to get rid of the old soil. So you can see it's come out of the pot. You see the roots are just starting to touch the edge of the pot. That's probably helping it to flower. African violets like to be root bound, so they like to be in pots that are a little bit smaller for the size of the plant. So I think this pot was an okay size, but I'm actually going to put this plant into a slightly smaller pot because it's going through the trauma now of being repotted, and I'm trying to make it as less stressful as possible. So we've got rid of most of that soil off there. Now these flowers that are on here, they're dying off, so we're going to remove them. And before I remove them, I always check them all to see if they've got seed pods on them, because African violets can self-pollinate. And it's quite fun if you can get a seed pod off them. And so this one here, you can see the crown of the plant. Another little bit of flower. It's the crown. And looking at this one, it just has, you can see, a single crown. No suckers coming off it at this stage. So the other one had lots of suckers, but just not ready to divide it up yet. You should be repotting your African violets every 6 months, because they do use all the they're in a pot, and the only nutrients they get is from what you put in there or what's in that soil. So every 6 months you should be repotting into fresh soil for your African violets. If you do that, they'll be really happy. So we'll just pot this one up. And so in 6 months' time, with that other plant that has the suckers, in 6 months, that's when I'm repotting, that's when I'll remove those suckers, because they'll be larger then and ready to go. So that one's looking good. So you can see when I've potted it, how it's sitting up out of the soil. And you can kind of make like a little moat around the outside. So you can kind of make a little indent around the edge, like a castle moat, where when you water it, the water will sit in around the edge there, but not sit up at the base of the leaves there where the plants doesn't particularly like it. So just remove this out of the way, and I'll show you these two plants now that they're potted up. This one we might even, you can actually see, this is an interesting little thing to see actually. This plant here, you can see it's actually got the flower stalk coming up from the plant. But what's actually happened is you've got 2 leaves that are growing out of the top of the flower stalk. So what you can actually do is, once it gets a little bit larger, you can remove that and plant that, and you'll have another African violet plant. Or what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it there and actually see what happens. See how it grows. And look at this. It's actually happening here as well. You've got another one where you've got 2 leaves coming out at the top of a flower stalk. And look, it looks like it's happening here as well. And here as well. Maybe that's something specific to this African violet variety. I don't know. I've not seen that actually happen. But that's fascinating. So I'm going to leave those flower stalks there like that, leave them die off, and just see how these develop. And I wonder if another African violet plant is going to grow up higher out of that. Maybe levels of African violet. I don't know. But that'll be an interesting thing to see and watch. So there we have it. There's the 2 plants that are repotted. So this one at the moment, we've only gotten one plant out of it. And this one's like a dark violet coloured bloom on this one. But that's fine. That'll be very nice when it flowers again in a few months. This one, looking at how many suckers are actually coming on this plant, we should get, I would say, 5 or 6 plants out of this one. And if all of these flower stalks develop these leaves, which it looks like is happening, we should get probably 4 or 5 more plants from this one on top when we remove these. So even though we've only paid for 1 plant, just alone with the suckers and these plants coming up, you've got about 10 plants. And then you can just, if you really enjoy the propagating, you can do leaf propagation and remove leaves. As you get the older leaves starting to get a little bit old, you can remove them and plant them. And people will tell you that you should just remove them and throw them away, but I can't bear to do that. I will remove them and plant them. And I find that I get very good amounts of babies from my leaves. And haven't found a difference whether it's older leaves, younger leaves, large leaves, smaller leaves. Haven't found any difference as to what gives more babies. It just seems to me to be very variety specific. So I don't pay a lot of attention to that. I just do what works for me. And I find that, even if it's older leaves, I still give it a go to do leaf propagation. And I've still found that I get quite a few babies from them as well. So bit of fun. But the other thing you need to do when you bring a plant home is you need to isolate it. So these plants now will be going into quarantine. I will actually be putting them and keeping them in a separate room to where my African violets are. I currently have probably around, I haven't counted for a while, but 500 or 600 African violets. And I would say probably 50% of those are leaf propagation and babies coming up. And I'm doing that fairly regularly because I'm getting to the point where I'd like to be able to perhaps do this as a little bit more of a business, but haven't got to that point yet, but that's a potential possibility for the future. And yeah, so quarantine your plants when they come home, because you can get mites and different pests that come on them, and you want to make sure that if they do have anything, they're not going to spread it to your other plants. So these plants are going to quarantine, and I will keep them in quarantine for around 6 months. And I do that, some people say 1 month, some people say 2. I like to think about 6 months I put them in quarantine, because these are Noid varieties. I've just got them at my local Bunnings. I don't know who's actually supplying them to Bunnings, so I don't know how reliable or stringent they are when it comes to pest control. So just to make sure that everything's okay, I'll keep them separate for about 6 months. And after 6 months, if they've shown no signs signs of diseases, and now that the soil's been changed, and I still have some of the original soil on the roots, so that's why I want to keep them separate for about 6 months. So in about 6 months, when I do the next soil change, which will be for me September, at the beginning of September, that's when I will bring them into my collection and add them into my collection. And any leaf propagations I do from them in that meantime, I will keep the leaf propagations separate as well, because you can get mites and things that can be living on the leaves, which can be very difficult to see. So best to keep them separate until you make sure that everything's okay. But yes, so just the most important rule is when you bring a new plant home from wherever it's come from, always repot it as soon as possible. Try to get off most of this original soil, pot it into a different pot, and then the pots you've gotten them in originally, wash them out with soapy water. And I like to also sit them out in the sun just to make sure that it kills any diseases or anything that could be on them. Keep them quarantined for about 6 months. Monitor them and enjoy them. Because they are extremely addictive and enjoyable. So I hope you've enjoyed watching this video and that it's been helpful. And I'll keep you updated on this fascinating plant, which has got these very interesting leaves, flower stalk leaf plants growing. And that'll be really interesting to see how it goes. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching.